Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. In today's video, I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into the mind of Christopher Watts. First, I'd like to look at people who are conflict avoidant, also referred to as people pleasers, and how these tendencies may be consistent with what we have seen from Christopher Watts. Conflict typically evokes strong emotions in people, and some people are conflict avoidant. They don't want to deal with conflict. It's a type of people pleasing behavior, and it arises from a person's deep rooted fear of upsetting other people. Conflict avoidant tendencies can be traced to childhood and the environment that the child grows up in. And it's typically a very dismissive and hypercritical environment. And it stems from the way the child learns to interact with their family members beginning at a pretty young age. So you see, inside every people pleaser is a little child who never felt loved and was afraid of being rejected by their parent or their caregiver. And in order to suppress that fear, the child becomes very well behaved and strives for the approval of their parent or caregiver. So people who are conflict avoidant believe that all conflict is destructive, and they're afraid to express themselves, express their own opinion, and they prefer to be seen as the nice person. People pleasers try to avoid conflict at all costs, and they'll do anything to diffuse a confrontation or an argument. And this is typically seen when they back down from an argument, or they say yes when they really want to say no. When a person is afraid of disapproval, they rarely show you who they really are, and they often live a life that's not very authentic. They hide themselves behind the mask of niceness, and it's impossible for them to separate their own self-worth from their actions. So let's look at some of the features of people pleasing. People pleasers are very polite and they're very agreeable. They rarely let on to other people that they're angry or unhappy. They mask their own feelings, and sometimes they don't even know what they want or how they feel anymore. People pleasers tend to do things not out of kindness or willingness, but as a consequence of not being able to say no to anyone. People pleasers are conflict avoidant. Their motto is peace at any price, and they'll do just about anything to avoid conflict. Most people pleasers have a deep sense of being unworthy. They feel worthless, and they think that their worth comes from their agreeableness and acts of service to other people, and not from who they are as a person. And because people pleasers feel that their value comes from what they do and not who they are, they're constantly striving to garner goodwill from other people. So it's important to understand that People pleasing comes with a very high price. They typically have very deep rooted resentments. They feel badly about who they are, and they try to redeem themselves by having other people like them. In a relationship, this person will go silent on their partner, or change the subject, or deflect, redirect the conversation to avoid conflict. And suppression of emotions eventually results in psychological breakdowns, and feelings of rage and hatred and bitterness. People pleasers have an intense need to be in control. At first, people pleasing might come across as a very selfless act, but people pleasing is actually a very selfish act, because the person is trying to control someone else's reactions towards them, by behaving in a certain way. People pleasing is actually more about the desire to control than it is about pleasing other people. Wanting to be liked by others is just a symptom of the person's need and desire to be in control, because deep down the person feels worthless and powerless. When you are a people pleaser, no one really knows the true, authentic you. They only know the facade that you present to them, the facade of niceness. So the people pleaser in reality is a people user. They use other people to meet their own need for love and nurturing, and the need for validation and approval. It's as simple as that. The people pleaser harbors an unconscious belief that if they make other people happy and never upset or offend anyone, it will somehow result in them receiving the love and nurturing and affirmation that was lacking in their childhood. People pleasers can become fixated on a particular individual, becoming convinced that this person is, quote, the one who is most able to provide them with what they're looking for. And it can become very difficult for the people pleaser to let go of this other person. And I believe that this is the case with Christopher Watts and his relationship with the mistress. I believe that he really thought he had found the one, and the thought of losing her played a big role, I believe, in the annihilation of his existing family. Now, avoidance of conflict, particularly in romantic relationships, can result in a lot of pent-up resentment. And because people-pleasing behavior stems from a fear of confrontation, a fear of conflict, and a fear of criticism, the decisions and the responses and the behaviors and the actions of people pleasers are carefully planned out in order to avoid any conflict. The next thing I want to look at is the psychological disorder known as avoidant personality disorder. Now, avoidant personality disorder is one of a group of conditions that falls under the category of personality disorders. And people with avoidant personality disorder have enduring patterns of behavior that cause suffering, not only for themselves, but for the people around them. In fact, about 2% of the US population has this diagnosis of avoidant personality disorder. It appears in both men and women equally. And avoidant personality disorder symptoms may be noticed in childhood, but they begin to create discomfort in adolescence and in early adulthood. Avoidant personality disorder is not diagnosed in people under the age of 18 years old because, like many personality disorders, there needs to be evidence that these patterns of behaviors are enduring and inflexible, and they don't fade over time. And it's also not diagnosed in children because a child's personality is still developing. And if you do see shyness in a child, that doesn't necessarily mean that the child won't outgrow their shyness. Avoidant personality disorder can only be diagnosed by a trained mental health professional, and it's based on criteria that's outlined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5. So let's look at some of the symptoms that I look for when diagnosing someone with avoidant personality disorder. Now, the DSM-5 states that a person needs to have a consistent pattern of avoiding social contact, being overly sensitive to rejection and criticism, have feelings of inadequacy, and these need to be displayed in a number of categories. So first, let's take a look at, does this person demonstrate avoidance of occupational activities that involve significant social contact out of a fear of disapproval or rejection or criticism? These people experience anxiety in social settings and in relationships, and it leads them to avoid activities or jobs that involve being around other people. Now, as we've seen in the case of Christopher Watts, he's known to have worked in solitary positions. First, he was a mechanic before moving to Colorado, and then he was employed as a field coordinator within Andarco. And both of these positions are largely solitary positions. The next category we look at is an unwillingness to become involved with other people unless they are certain that they are going to be liked. They are conflict avoidant, as we said, and people pleasers. And I think that Christopher Watts has shown us over and over again that he is indeed conflict avoidant. And it's safe to say, based on what we've seen, that he is indeed a people pleaser. Now, people with this disorder have very few friends and they lack a social network. As we heard from his mother in her first interview after the murders, she told us that growing up, Christopher Watts only had 2 close friends. And in the interviews that were conducted with his co-workers from Anadarko, they also said that he rarely spoke to anyone at work. People with avoidant personality disorder are preoccupied with being criticized and rejected in social situations, and they are hypersensitive to being negatively evaluated. Now, if you remember after the first confession, Chris said to law enforcement that he hoped that they didn't think less of him after he confessed to the murder. So the person's fear of rejection is so strong that they avoid social interactions rather than risk being rejected. And people with avoidant personality disorder, they also hold back in intimate relationships out of a fear of being ridiculed or humiliated. They're afraid of doing or saying something wrong, and they have a difficult time expressing themselves within their relationships, and they may be highly reluctant to take any risks out of a fear of humiliation or embarrassment. Their feelings of being inadequate typically begin in early adulthood. Now, an example of Chris Watts' fear of embarrassment is seen in the story that he told law enforcement about the night that Shanann locked him out of the house early in their relationship after an argument over him having female contacts in his phone. Now, he reported that he stood up to her at that time and she locked him out of the house. And he also advised that he never challenged her again after that because he was afraid that she'd lock him out of the house and he'd be embarrassed in front of his neighbors. Now, another example of his fear of embarrassment was in his very emotional response to law enforcement when they suggested that one of his coworkers take them out to serve E319. Now, this is one of the only times that we saw any genuine emotion out of him. And it's important to understand that the emotion that we saw was for himself. He was literally mortified at this thought that his coworkers would find out about the murders and what he did, and the shame at the very thought of that, the shame he felt over that. The causes of avoidant personality disorder are thought to involve genetics, environment, social and psychological factors. Typically, there's some level of emotional abuse in childhood or criticism, ridicule, a lack of affection or nurturing by a parent or caregiver during childhood. These things can result in the development of avoidant personality disorder. Another factor is being rejected by a peer group as well. This can also contribute to the development of this disorder. In my next video, I'm going to discuss whether or not Christopher Watts is on the spectrum. A lot of people believe he has Asperger's, and so I want to address that misinformation and take a look at why I believe that he is not on the spectrum. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch my video, and that was Loki that you saw photobombing the video. He's sitting in my lap. So thank you again so much for stopping by and watching my video, and thank you for all your kind comments as well. I really appreciate it. See you next time.